I'm speaking to you from Yerushalayim. As you probably know, there's time of war. If a siren goes off, I will move off to my miklat. But so far today, here in Yerushalayim, for the last several hours, it's been quiet. I want to learn. We've got an hour. I plan to give about 40, 45 minutes of to focus on a particular halacha, and then we'll have time for questions, open questions at the end. And if no one asks questions, believe me, I've got enough Hilchot Pesach to take us through the next 5 or 6 hours. What are we going to learn about today? Today, we're going to learn about how much matzah do you actually need to eat at Seder night? And this is a wonderful question because so many of you have been at a Seder where it seems like it's just unending amounts of matzah that people are expecting you to eat. And people seem to just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. On the other hand, maybe we have memories of where we used to just kind of like take a bite. And so what's the truth? How much matzah do we need to eat? And when are we eating it? And what does each eating mean? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to see a little bit of some. When I was a child, I saw a magician and he was really cool because he pulled out of his mouth a ping pong ball, which I thought was pretty cool. And then he made another one and another one, another one, and just kept coming. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a pasuk from the Torah about eating matzah, and we're going to see how it expands until we get to the amount of matzah we eat today. And then we'll talk about how to do this practically. So where does it start? Well, there's a pasuk in the Torah. The Torah tells us, al matzot u'maror yachluhu, that the Korban Pesach should be eaten with matzah and maror. However, if you don't have Korban Pesach, then you don't have a Torah obligation to eat matzah and maror. And that's why maror today is only rabbinic. However, there's another pasuk that says, be'erev tachlu matzot. This evening, on the night of Pesach, you must eat matzah. Be'erev tachlu matzot. The book of Shemot, Perek Yud Bet. From that verse, the Rambam and all the codifiers learn out that there is a mitzvah d'oraita to eat matzah, whether the Beit Mikdash exists and we could do Korban Pesach, or whether, like in our day, we don't have a Beit Mikdash and there's no Korban Pesach. So, we now have a Torah obligation to eat matzah on Seder night. And, as the Rambam says, every Torah obligation to eat is the size of a kazayit, the size of an olive. And later on, we'll talk about how to figure out how much that is in our matzot today. But we're starting off with a Torah obligation to eat one kazayit. This Torah obligation is going to jump 4 times. It's going to expand in the course of the next half hour. So let's see how this one kazayit of eating matzah expands 4 times. Okay, first expansion is that we fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah during the Seder night. And at the Seder night, we're actually going to eat matzah 3 times. Let's remember the song, Kadesh Uchat. So we get up to Motzi Matzah. That's the first one. Then we're going to have Korech. That's the second one. And then we're going to have Tzafun. That's the third one. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's start with the last time we eat. That's called in that song Safun, the hidden matzah, and it's what we call today afikomen. But that name is really not so exact. Let's figure out what that eating is, that last matzah that we eat on Seder night. The Gemara says that after you eat the Korban Pesach, ein ochlim achar Pesach afikoman. After you've eaten the Korban Pesach, you cannot eat afikoman. What is afikoman? So it's not what we call afikoman. Afikoman is a Greek word, and it means dessert. There's an argument in the Gemara what type of dessert it is, but it's dessert. The Gemara kind of took that word, that Greek word that means dessert, and dipped it in the mikveh and turned it into a Jewish word and made a play on words and said it means afiku man, bring out more food. But that's just a play on words. What it really is, the Greek word that means dessert, or in the language of the Gemara, bring out more food. So after you've eaten your Korban Pesach, you cannot have any more food. The Gemara goes on and says, and now we don't have Korban Pesach. Ein ochlim matzah afikomen. You can't eat matzah after afikomen. Oh, okay. After you've eaten your matzah, you can't eat any other food. This is going to be a very depressing Seder night. We're going to wash, we're going to eat matzah, and now we're not allowed to have afikomen. We're not allowed to have any more food. What about the kanedelach? What about the soup? What about dinner? So we've got a real problem. After you eat Korban Pesach, you can't eat any more food. After you've eaten matzah today, you can't eat any more food. So how are we going to cope with that? So they came up with a very interesting idea. We will eat another piece of matzah at the end of the meal. That last piece of matzah, after it, we won't eat any more food. So we now are going to have at least 2 eatings of matzah at dinner time. We're going to start the meal with matzah, and we're going to finish the meal with matzah. We're going to start the meal with matzah because it's a Yontif meal. And we're going to finish the meal with matzah because we're not allowed to eat after the matzah any more food. So we need to eat at the end some matzah. Now, when I was growing up, my father, he should live a good long life, he used to say, on Seder night, there's no dessert. And we'd say, but why isn't there any dessert? He'd say, because the afikoman is dessert. Because he said, you don't eat after the matzah afikoman. Afikoman is Greek, it means dessert. That means the last matzah you eat is the afikoman. Baruch Hashem, my mother, who should also live a good long life, made sure that we always had a lovely dessert on Seder night, and my father didn't get to set the menu. But you get the idea. That word afikoman has now been transferred to that last matzah. Really, that last matzah is safun. It's the hidden matzah. It's the last matzah. It's the end of the evening matzah. And you don't eat after it afikoman. Because you're not eating afikoman, dessert after it, it became the dessert, the afikoman, and that last matzah is afikoman. Okay, so we now have at least 2 matzahs that we're eating on Seder night. The first one is to start the meal and do the mitzvah of eating matzah. And the last one is so that we eat at the end of the meal matzah. And then we have one in the middle, which is the Hillel sandwich, korech. Motzi, matzah, korech. So we now have korech, which is to do the mitzvah of maror together with matzah. Let's explain that a little bit. There's a machloket in the Gemara about how exactly you should eat Pesach, matzah, maror. Hillel believed you needed to eat them all together. He would take a piece of matzah that in his day was like the Yemenite or Sephardi soft matzah, very similar to like a lafa, pita type thing. He would put inside it the meat of the Korban Pesach. He would add maror. You have to dip the maror in charoset, like trina. You would wrap it up. I assume they had pre-cut pieces of alfoil that they stuck on the bottom so it didn't drip out onto your shirt. You would lean to the left and eat Korban Pesach at the end of the meal. Wonderful. Today, we eat matzah, then we eat maror, and then we eat matzah and maror in memory of what Hillel did. So that's another piece of matzah. That's the Hillel sandwich. We do that we say the words in memory of what Hillel did. Now, when I think about things that we do in memory, there are lots of different levels of memory. One of the rabbis who teaches at Nishmat, Rav Avram Blibstein, he's the rabbi of the city of Tekoa, and he also performs weddings for people who aren't so religious. And he told me that many, many years ago, he performed a wedding for a couple who weren't religious at all, but they wanted to get married in Israel with a chuppah and with a rabbi, and he agreed to do it. So when he sat down and talked to them about the wedding beforehand, the to be bride said, "Listen, he's going to give me a ring, but I want to give him a ring at the same time." So Rab Liebstein said that to himself. He said, "That's a real problem." But he didn't know how to say that to the lady because halachically it's a problem because technically the man is purchasing the woman and the woman has to be purchased with the ring, and he didn't know how that language would go over very well with this non-religious lady, and he thought that it wasn't a good idea to start explaining that the man marries the woman and the woman gets married through the ring. He didn't want, so he smiled and he said, "That's beautiful, but why doesn't anyone ever ask me if the color, the bride can smash the glass?" And she looked stunned and said, "Really? The bride can do the." He said, "Yes." And so she forgot all about the ring, which was great because halachically that's a big problem if at the same time they're just swapping rings. If he gives her a ring, if she gives him a ring afterwards, that's not so big problem. But under the chuppah to swap rings at the same time, big halachic problem. So what did they do? At the end of the chuppah, he stood up, he said, "And this wedding, both the bride and the groom are going to remember the destruction of the temple." And they put the cups down and they both with their feet went smash and they smashed two glasses. Everyone said Mazal Tov. He heard someone one of the guests said, "Where did they find such this beautiful Reform rabbi? This is great." So Rab Lipstein is not a Reform rabbi, he's an Orthodox rabbi. He just knows what we know, that smashing the cup is only memory. And it's not a halacha. Eating the Hillel sandwich is not a memory like that. Eating the Hillel sandwich is a rabbinic obligation, like shaking the lulav on Chol Hamoed, like second day Yom Tov. It's a rabbinic obligation. So there are different levels of memory. There's breaking the cup under the chuppah. That's memory. And if you don't do it, you're still married. And if you do it in a different way, it's fine. And then there's memory that's rabbinic obligation. And that's what the Hillel sandwich is. So now we have 3 eatings of matzah. We start the meal with mitzvah matzah. We wash, we say hamotzi, and alachilat matzah, mitzvah matzah. We have matzah at the end of the meal in order that the last thing we eat should be matzah, because we're not allowed to eat after the matzah anything. And we also have the Hillel sandwich, which is another piece of matzah with the maror. So we now have 3 eatings of matzah. So to remember, from the Torah, there was only one matzah. That is, be'erev tachlu matzot, 1 kazayit. That 1 kazayit has now become 3. So that's the first level of expansion of the mitzvah. In order that we can actually have a Yom Tov meal and not just eat matzah, we need to have matzah at the beginning and the end. And in order to do the sandwich like Hillel, we need to have another piece of matzah with another piece of maror. Okay, so we've now turned 1 kazayit of matzah to 3. Let's go to the next level of expansion. The next level of expansion is that those 3 are going to expand to 5. And how is that going to happen? Well, let's go to the last matzah, the afikomen. We explained the opinion that the last matzah is in order that we finish the meal with matzah and we don't eat anything after it. That's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch and the Rosh. But Rashi and the Rashbam, they both believe that the mitzvah matzah is the one we eat at the end of the meal. Let's go back to the time of the temple. Do you remember we took the matzah, we put the Pesach in it, we put the maror in it, we wrapped it up, we put a piece of alfoil on the end so it wouldn't drip on our clothes, and we ate that at the... When did they eat that at Seder night? So it's Seder night when we have the temple, you have to eat the Korban Pesach ala sova, on a full stomach. So first they would wash, because it's Yom Tov, you have to have 2 pieces of matzah at least. So they would make kiddush, they would wash, they would eat matzah. Then they would eat the Korban Chagiga, the festival offering. Then they would probably have soup with knedelach and whatever else they had for dinner. And then at the end of the evening, with a full stomach, they would then eat the Korban Pesach, because the Korban Pesach, the Torah tells us, has to be eaten on a full stomach. So says Rashi, the mitzvah matzah that we eat today is not at the beginning of the meal, it's at the end of the meal. Wow, that's a huge change. I don't know about you ladies, but when I eat the matzah at the beginning of the meal, I'm in spiritual heaven. I'm leaning to my left. I'm thinking about leaving Egypt. I'm doing mitzvah matzah. Now, by the time I get to Afikomen, oh man, really? And I'm not in such spirit. It's Afikomen, really? Do I have room for this? Can I do it? But according to Rashi, the opposite is true. When you eat at the beginning of the meal, it's like on Shabbos meal, like eating the challah. It's like beginning of the meal. And the mitzvah matzah is at the end of the meal. That's the one you should be in spiritual heaven for, and doing mitzvah matzah is at the end of the meal. The halacha is not like Rashi. But the great rabbis, the Maharil, the Bach, the Magen Avraham, the Mishnah Berurah, all the rabbis down to my Haggadah say, if you can, you should eat 2 kazetim at the end of the meal, one for the Pesach and one for Rashi's mitzvah matzah. The last matzah that we just ate, instead of just being afikomen to finish the night off with matzah in our mouth, should have an additional kazayit of matzah with it. If you've got room to eat 2 kazaytim at the end of the meal, in order that you eat Pesach and matzah that was eaten with it. Okay. So we now have, at the end of the meal, instead of 1 kazayit, which is the obligation, advice, a good thing to do is to eat 2 kazaytim at the end of the meal. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a bit of foresight, and you have to eat room, and you have to sit down at the Seder table that's not filled with food like my grandmother of blessed memory or my wife makes today, which is just like, wow. But if you've got foresight, you can leave room for 2 kazetim at the end. Now let's go to the first matzahs that we eat. There we say we're starting our meal. It's mitzvah matzah, according to the Shulchan Aruch. Asher kiddushanu b'zatam v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. It's mitzvah matzah. We have to eat a kazayit. The Shulchan Aruch, though, says you should eat 2 kazetim at the beginning of the meal. The Shulchan Aruch is quoting the Rosh, one of the great Rishonim, and he says you should eat 2 kazetim at the beginning of the meal. Why 2 kazetim? That question is better than any of the answers I'm about to give. Everybody asks on the Shulchan Aruch, why in the world should you have to eat 2 kazetim, 2 olives worth at the beginning of the meal? Why not just 1? That question is so good that the Chazon Ish Zatzal in the last generation is going to only eat 1 kazait. But one suggested answer is that we actually said 2 blessings, Hamotz lechem min haaretz, and then Asher kiddushanu v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. We need to eat the mitzvah matzah from one of the 3 matzah. We're holding 3 matzahs, a full one, a half one, because the other half has been hidden away for afikomen, and a full one from the bottom. Which one of those matzahs was hamotzi, and which one was al achilat matzah? Was the top one al achilat matzah and the middle one hamotzi? Or was the middle one hamotzi and the top one achilat matzah? Because for achilat matzah, you need a kazait. For hamotzi, you can just take a taste. So therefore, we eat a kazait from both of them. A kazait from the top one, says the Shulchan Aruch, and a kazait from the middle one. Because maybe the top one is mitzvah matzah, and you need a kazait. No, maybe the middle one, the half-broken one, is mitzvah matzah, and you need a kazait. So if you can, says the Shulchan Aruch, you should eat 2 kazaitim, one from the top and one from the middle. Comes along Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, and he says, based on this, this is only true for the person who's actually getting from the three matzahs. In my house, my grandfather would say the blessing on the matzahs, and he would give us a little bit. He would eat a kazayit from those two matzahs, and everyone else would just get a little piece. And where was our kazayit from? From the big pile in the middle of the table. Is that what you do in your houses too? I imagine it is. That the person saying hamotzi, grandfather, the father of the household, says hamotzi and alachilat matzah, and he breaks off a little bit that gets passed around to everyone. He himself gets a kazayit from the top and a kazayit from the middle one. Everyone else gets a little piece, and everyone else fills their kazetim from the pile in the middle. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, well, if you're not getting from the top and the middle, you don't need two kazetim. The only reason you needed two kazayits was because you're eating, we don't know which matzah it's from, but if you're not eating from those matzahs anyway, you don't need two kazetim. Listen carefully. What did Rav Moshe Feinstein do in his family? He made sure that everyone had three matzahs in front of them, so each one of them could merit to eat two kazetim at the beginning of the meal. Thank you, Rav Feinstein. Yes, in many families, people do that. They give each married man a set of three matzahs, so that, or each person three matzahs, so that everyone can get two kazetim. Let's summarize that. At the beginning of the meal, the Shulchan Aruch says you should have two kazetim. We're not quite sure why, and that might only apply to the person who's actually getting it from the three matzahs that are in front of the person leading the Seder. But it is written in the Shulchan Aruch that it's advisable for everyone to eat two kazetim. For Korach, Hillel sandwich, you only need one kazayit, and that's rabbinic. And for Afikomen, you only need one kazayit, that's rabbinic. But it'd be really good if you could eat two, because Rashi said that's mitzvah matzah. So you want to do one for the Pesach and one for the matzah that was with it. So now we've turned the Torah obligation, the Erev Tachlu Matzot, this night eat matzah. We've turned that into three eatings, the beginning of the meal, Hillel sandwich, and the Afikomen. And now we've turned that three into five. Two at the beginning, according to the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe that's only the person who gets the three matzahs. Maybe it's everyone. Maybe it's no one. Chazon Ish. One matzah for Korach, and two for the end, because maybe Rashi's correct. That's not an obligation, but it's strongly advised by our rabbis. Wow. This is wonderful. We've turned one kazayit into three, and we turned three into five. I hope you're still with me, because now we need to start figuring out how much a kazayit is. And we're now going to do the next level. We've got two levels left. The next level is to try and figure out how big a kazayit is. The word kazayit means like an olive. So we know, we've been to the shuk, we've seen that there are many different types of olive, but there's an average olive, average olive. So what's the question? How big is an olive? I'll go to the supermarket and I'll look how big an olive is. The Jewish people in diaspora went to places where they never saw an olive in their whole life. From the time of the Gaonim through the period of the Rishonim, the rabbis and the Jewish communities who moved out of Spain, out of Babylon, out of Spain, out of Italy, and moved further into Europe, ended up in Germany, France, Poland, Russia. They got up to England. They're moving further and further away from any olive trees. And they'd never seen an olive. But they had seen eggs. The Gemara says that when the Jewish people went into the diaspora, into Galut, the holy presence, the Shekhinah, accompanied us. The chickens accompanied us too. And we always had eggs, because we're Jews, we always had eggs. So the rabbis knew how big an egg was, but they didn't know how big an olive was. So what did they do? They looked in the Gemara. And the Gemara tells us that your throat, your beta bliah, the place where you swallow, can hold one egg. That's how big a person could swallow. One egg. And there's another Gemara that says a person could swallow two zayits, two olives. In one go, you can do one egg, or in one go, you can do two olives. Those of you who have got any mathematical ability at this point are nodding your heads and saying, so the size of an olive is 1/2 of an egg. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch rules. The Shulchan Aruch rules that an olive is half an egg. I know there are lots of different types of eggs. The Gemara talks about the average middle-sized egg. Okay. That's the opinion of Tosfot and the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. Comes along the Rambam, and the Rambam has a different Gemara. He has a Gemara that tells us that an Eruv Tafshilim, where you have to collect food to unite an area for Shabbos, transferal, he says that that is 6 eggs or 18 dried figs. Galgorot, 18 dried figs. Now we know that a dried fig is bigger than an olive. A dried fig is bigger than an olive. So if we have 18 dried figs that are 6 eggs, therefore we know that there are 3 dried figs in an egg, and therefore we know that an olive is less than 1/3 of an egg. How much less than 1/3 we don't know, but it's 1/3 or less. It's not bigger than 1/3 of an egg. So now we have 2 opinions of how big a kazayit is. Is a kazayit, like the Shulchan Aruch says, 1/2 of an egg? Or is a kazayit, like the Rambam says, 1/3 of an egg? That's a difference. The Mishnah Berurah tells us that we should follow the following rule. If it's a Torah mitzvah, doraita, use the big olives, 1/2 an egg. And if it's a rabbinic mitzvah, you can use the smaller eggs, the smaller olives, that is 1/3. He has 2 exceptions. He says, if you're unwell, if things are hard for you, you can always use the 1/3. You can always use the smaller measure. And he says, and if it's rabbinic, but you're saying a blessing, you should always use the 1/2, the bigger olive. Let's see what this would do for us if we applied just what we've learned now to what we've learned already in the class. We've learned that if you want to be a good normative Jew, you can fulfill Seder night by eating a kazayit at the beginning of the meal, a kazayit for the Hillel sandwich, and a kazayit of matzah for the afikomen. If you want to be a really good, if you're healthy, if you're able to do the mitzvot in the best way, you should do 2 kazayitim for the first, then 1, and then 2 for afikomen. Okay? So we have the minimalist and the maximalist. Now let's apply our olive to that. If we were a maximalist olive eater, we would say our olives are 1/2 an egg, like the Shulchan Aruch says. If we're eating 5 kazaitim, and each kazait is 1/2 an egg, we'd be eating 2.5 eggs worth of matzah. But if we were minimalistic Jews who were eating just 3 kazaitim of matzah, 1, 1, 1, and each kazait would be 1/3 of an egg, total we'd be eating 1 egg's worth of matzah. That's a big difference. I'm not talking about people who are sick. I'm not talking about people who've got in life-threatening situation. I'm talking about normative Jew. You could be a normative Jew and say, I'm eating 1 kazayit at the beginning of Seder, 1 kazayit for Hillel, and 1 kazayit for afikomen. I'm not doing the strictures. And you could say, and the size of a kazayit is 1/3 of an egg, like the Rambam says. Then you would be eating 3/3 of an egg. That is total 1 egg. Or you could say, hey, this is Seder night. This is my chance. Let's do it the best I can. In which case you do what it says in the Haggadah, which would be to eat 2 kazaitim at the beginning, 1 for Hillel and 2 at the end. That's 5 kazaitim. And you would say each kazait should be 1/2 an egg. And so you'd be eating 2.5 eggs. That's a difference of 250%. Okay? But we haven't finished. We've now got the last level of this magic trick, and then we'll try and figure out how much is it in our matzahs. Okay. I want to take you to the middle of the 1700s, to a rabbi whose name is Rav Yecheskel Landau, Rav Yecheskel Landau was the rabbi of Prague in the middle of the 1700s, and he is one of the greatest rabbis of Europe. He's going to write a book of responsa called the Noda Yehuda, if you've heard about it. He's going to write a commentary on the Gemara called the Tzlach. He's going to write a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch called the Dugu Revava, and his name is Yecheskel Landau. As I said, one of the greatest rabbis of Europe at the time. He's sitting on the rabbinic seat of Prague, and several hundred years before him had sat in that seat the Maharavmi Prague and then the Tosfos Yontef. From those days, hundreds of years before him, they had actually a measure in Prague that they kept in the synagogue that said this measure is the measure of how much dough you need to bake to be obligated to take challah. That measure, we know from the Gemara, is 43 and a little bit eggs. He had a physical measure from the time of the Maharavmi Prague. One afternoon, I don't know if it was afternoon, that I just made up. One afternoon, he had nothing to do, and he decided to check that measure and see if it was really correct. How do you check that? Well, we know that measure is supposed to be 43 and a little bit of an egg. So what did he do? He took a bowl and he filled it with water, with a meniscus, and he put that bowl inside a very large tub. And then he took 43 eggs, bloop, and he submerged them in the water. As each egg went in, it displaced the exact amount of water that was one egg's worth. As each egg went in, he yelled, "Eureka!" And one egg's worth of water overflowed into his tub. He did that 43 and a little bit times, and then he took the amount of water that had been displaced, measured it, and he was so happy. It was exactly the measure he had from the time of the Maharal of Prague, from the time of the Tosfos Yontef. It was what they call a punt, which must be connected to the word pound somehow, from Prague. He was thrilled. At that point, he then remembered that the Gemara says that the size of an egg is exactly 2 by 2 by 2 and a little bit fingers. He said, well, if I'm already here and I've got the tubs, let's see if it works out with fingers. So he cleaned everything up and he filled up the bowl again with water up to the meniscus, and he started putting fingers in. And he did that exactly that amount of times, and he was crestfallen because he discovered that the amount of water, the size that was displaced when he did this measure with fingers, as the Gemara says, was not equal to eggs, which the Gemara says it should be equal. It was twice as big. It was twice as big. That would be very problematic. Twice as big. What had happened here? Eggs and 2 by 2 by 2, something fingers should be equal. And it wasn't equal. 100% difference. He had two options. He thought first that perhaps people had got bigger over the time of history. In brackets, that's true. People actually have got bigger. We know because of our diet and a whole lot of things, people, historically today, people are actually bigger, certainly in Europe, than they were in the time of the Gemara. But he rejected that because he said, we have a Gemara. The Gemara says, Yeridat Dorot. Each generation gets less. Yeridat Dorot. The generations get smaller. Nearly everyone except for the Noda Yehuda understands that Gemara to mean that we get spiritually lower. But he understood it to mean physically. So he said, if people haven't got bigger, then the chickens must have got smaller. And so he came to the conclusion that all our measures to be on the safe side need to be doubled. So if the Gemara says you should eat 1 olive, you should now eat 2. And if the Gemara says you should eat 1 egg, you should now eat 2. This opinion of Rav Yecheskel Landau made its way through Europe. It was accepted by such big rabbis as the Chatam Sofer. It came to Eretz Yisrael, was accepted by the Chazon Ish, and is a generally accepted opinion today. When you hear about Chazon Ish measurements, that's what it's talking about. Let's split screen and go to the late 1800s in Egypt. There's a Chabad Shaliach. His name is Rav Avraham Chaim Noe, the Grach Noe. He's been sent out not by the last Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, but by his father-in-law, and he's a Chabad Shaliach in Egypt. And he's a huge Torah scholar. He's really big. And he's very interested. How did the Egyptians know how big a Kiddush cup is? How big a piece of matzah should be? So he asks them, and they smile, and they say, Rabbi, what's your problem? The Rambam tells us how big the measurements are. And Rav Chaim Noah says, yeah, but the Rambam tells you it in a coin. He says, this measurement is the weight and size of this coin called the dram. How do you know what the Rambam's drum was? And they smile again at Rav Chaim Noah, and they put their hands in their pocket, and they pull out these coins that had been in use until the end of the Ottoman Empire, which hadn't yet departed, right? It's going to fall in the time of the First World War. They're still using the same coins. So he gets very excited, and he starts measuring the weight and displacement of the coins. And what do you know? It's exactly like eggs, and you don't have to double anything. And that's exactly the measure. What is he going to do with Rav Yechezkel Landau's fingers? He's going to say Rav Yechezkel Landau was a very big man and he measured incorrectly. He had big fingers. I don't know what he's going to do with one of Rav Yechezkel Landau's students says that about his rabbi. He said he was like Shaul. He was a big man and he had big fingers, and that's why he got the wrong measurements. But Rav Chaim Noeh, he says you don't have to double anything. It's like an olive is based, an olive is an olive, an egg is an egg. Nothing has changed. His measurements are accepted by the whole Sephardi world, by Chabad, and by the Jerusalem Ashkenazim. Rav Chaim Noah is going to come on Aliyah. He's going to live in Sfat in the end of his life, and his measurements are accepted by all the Yushalmim, Rav Shimon Zalman Auerbach, all those type of rabbis. My rabbi, Rav Henkin Zatzal, he told me that he has a tradition from his grandfather that those measurements are correct. They're the ones we use to be strict and to be lenient. I'll just give you an example. Rav Chaim Noah says a Kiddush cup has to be 86 milliliters. The Chazon Ish, Rav Yechezkel Landau, the Chatzim Sofer say it has to be 156 milliliters, almost twice as big. So now let's take our matzot. We said that you start off by having to eat one kazait. We said that turns into 3 kazaitim at the meal. We said, but if you want to do it properly, that's 5 kazaitim at the meal. We said, if you want to be a maximalist, 5 kazaitim will equal 2.5 eggs. Now let's add to that Rav Yechezkel Landau, the Chazon Ish. That 2.5 eggs is going to double and turn into 5 eggs worth. But if you stay a minimalist Jew, you're going to eat 3 kazaitim of matzah at the Seder night, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Each time you're going to eat 1/3 of a kazait, you're going to say that a kazait is 1/3 of an egg, and you're not going to double the egg at all. And so you're going to end up eating 1 egg's worth of matzah. That's a huge difference. Are you eating 1 egg's worth of matzah, or are you eating 5 eggs worth of matzah? And that's why you go to some people's Seder and they're eating a lot of matzah, and you're going to some people's Seder and they're eating only a little bit. Okay, now let's go and translate that into our matzot today. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the measures in machine matzahs, because machine matzahs are uniform. And so when I give you a measure in a machine matzah, it's quite easy to measure it. Many people eat handmade matzahs on Seder. Handmade matzahs, each one is different thickness, and each one has got a different weight and a different size. So it's harder to compare the measures, but I'll tell it in machine. And from machine, you'll then be able to try and figure it out what that means in handmade matzahs. But let's go and look. I made a nice table here. The maximalists are someone like Rav Mordechai Eliyahu of blessed memory. He holds that each kazayit is 1 piece of matzah. And that would mean that you should eat 2 pieces of matzah at the beginning of the Seder, 1 piece of matzah for korech, and 2 pieces of matzah for afikomen. How does he get that a kazait is a whole piece of matzah? Do you remember that I said you could put 2 kazaitim in your mouth and swallow at the same time? The reason he does it is because he goes by weight, and each piece of matzah is just short of 30 grams, and he holds that a kazait is 28.8 grams. So he says a kazait is a piece of matzah. I had the honor of speaking to Rav Eliyahu. There was a time in my life when I used to meet him each week, and I merited to ask him questions. One time I asked him, I said, Rav, a kazait is a whole piece of matzah. You should eat 2 pieces at the beginning, 2 pieces at the end, and 1 piece. That's a lot of matzah. And he said to me, are you having a picnic on Chol HaMoed? Now, when I stood in front of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu Zatzal, he was the chief rabbi of Israel. He was a huge Talmid Chacham. I didn't know what was going on. I was asking a question in halacha, and he was asking me about my plans for Chol HaMoed, and I knew he didn't want to come to my picnic. So I kind of didn't know what to say. I said, yeah. He said, let me tell you what's going to happen in your picnic. You're going to take 1 piece of matzah and another piece and another piece and another piece. You're going to eat lots of matzah. But when it comes to Seder night, that one night of the year, when it's a mitzvah from the Torah to eat one particular food, matzah, and it's the last mitzvah we have from the Torah that tells us to eat a particular food, until we rebuild the Beit HaMikdash and have korbanot, this is it. Suddenly your Yetzer Hara is yelling out, kazayit, diet, I'm full. He said, it's just your Yetzer Hara. Wow. It was only years later when one of my children married into the Eliyahu family, what a merit, and I realized why Rav Eliyahu has such big measurements. Because he uses soft matzahs. That's the Sephardi tradition, that they make very thick, soft matzahs that are heavier and more dense. And to eat 2 kazaitim is very small, even though each one weighs a whole lot of weight. So for him to put 2 pieces of this soft matzah in his mouth and eat them is very easy. But for me, who's eating these Ashkenazi dry crackers, it's almost impossible. That would be a maximum opinion, but most rabbis don't hold like that. What do most rabbis say? Most rabbis say that a kazayit is somewhere between 1/3 to 1/2 a piece of matzah. So if we look on our chart, we'll see that, for example, Rav Feinstein gives it here in inches and centimeters, but Rav Shimon Eider turns that into that a kazayit is 1/3 of a matzah. Therefore, if you can, you should eat 2/3 of a matzah at the beginning. But like we said, if you don't get those mitzvah matzahs, or if you want to be a simple, proper Jew, you could eat 1/3 at the beginning. You can certainly eat 1/3 for afikomen. But if you want to do it, right? So that's what he says here for someone who's sick or someone who it's hard for them. He says you eat 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But if you can, you should eat 2/3, 1/3, and then 2/3 of a matzah. And that's, many people say, measures something like that. Some people say that a kazayit, the Chazon Ish says, is 1/2 a piece of matzah. You eat 2, then 1/2, then 1. At Nishmat, we have the great honor that Rav Rimon, the Rav of Elon Shvut, teaches at Nishmat regularly and is our halachic advisor. He has a wonderful, wonderful Haggadah. And in his Haggadah, he's got a center page with a picture, a life-size picture of the piece of matzah that you're supposed to eat. I said to Rav Rimon that I loved his Haggadah so much. I said, Rav, you should print that Haggadah pocket size for all the soldiers. And Rav Rimon really loves the Israeli soldiers. He takes such good care of them and does such a thing. He had this big smile. He said, oh, what a wonderful idea. I said, yes. And then your picture of the piece of matzah would also be pocket size and they could eat less matzah. Tom, he smiled. He didn't want to go with that one. So I guess if he makes a pocket edition, it'll have a fold out piece for the matzah. There was a great rabbi who I had the pleasure of asking questions when I first came to Israel, Rav Scheinberg Zatzal. He was the Rosh Hashiva of Torah Or. He made Aliyah from America. He was a huge Gaon. And he believed that if you fill your mouth up with bite-sized pieces of matzah, leaving room to chew like a normal person, but derech normali, then you for sure fulfill your mitzvah doraita. That is, he said, your mouth, if you fill it up, you fill it up with pizza and chew, 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 don't swallow yet, leave room to chew normally, you must have the amount there. Because the Gemara says that your mouth can swallow 2 kazait at the same time. I myself measured, and I believe that a kazait is about 1/6 of a piece of matzah. Each matzah has like 18 lines on it. It's like 3 of those lines. Or if you smash a matzah in half and then put the 2 pieces on top of each other and then break that into thirds, so each one of those pieces will be 1/6 of a matzah. That's very close to what Rav Steinberg says. So I believe that if a person ate 1/6 of a matzah, that would be advisable to eat 2/6, that is 1/3 of a matzah at the beginning, then 1/6 for korech, and then 1/6. But if you can eat 2/3, that would be very good. 2/6, 1/3, sorry, that would be good. But I'll tell you the truth. The truth is that I really agree with Rav Eliyahu. I don't agree that you have to eat 2 whole pieces at the beginning and then 1 and 2 pieces at the end. But I do agree with him that this is our opportunity. This is it. This is Seder night. This is a mitzvah d'oraita of eating the bread of our freedom, of doing a mitzvah. I really love mitzvot and I love matzot. So because I love mitzvot and matzot, I can do them together. And I don't stinge. I take, in my family, I tell them that people should take, for the beginning, at least 1/3 of a matzah, but you should try and go for 2/3 of a matzah, like Rav Shimon Ida says and Rav Feinstein. I say for korech, you should do 1/3, and for afikomen, you should do at least 1/3, but you should try for 2/3. I recognize that there are people who really have problems eating. I recognize that. People, certainly elderly people who have problems with their stomach, you don't have to get sick. If you go by 1/6, you fulfilled the mitzvah. But for those of us who are healthy, who are going to eat an extra serving of kanedlach soup, why don't you have an extra serving of mitzvah matzah? After I've finished my matzah, I keep eating matzah all during the evening because every bite is an additional mitzvah. Okay, I've got time for open questions. If anyone would like to ask some questions, I can answer them. And if not, I will. Yeah, we have some questions. Okay. So while you're thinking of your questions, if you want to write them in or open your mic and ask some questions, I'll move on to how long should you eat? How much time do you have to eat that matzah? We know we eat it leading to the left. How much time do we have to eat that matzah? So each kazayit should be eaten in a certain amount of time. There's an argument of how much time that is, whether it's 2 minutes or 9 minutes. Average rabbi says it's 4 minutes. Okay, I'll get to the.
We have a question. Do you want to finish or you want to?
Yeah, I'll just finish saying what I'm saying, and then I'll answer the
Sure.
question about the wine. Thank you. Okay, so I will just tell you that 4 minutes is a very good time to eat a kazayit. The people who have hard time chewing could do 9 minutes, but that's for each kazayit. So if you're eating 2 kazayitim at the beginning, then you've got double the amount of time. And it makes a lot of sense to say that the bigger you think a kazayit is, the bigger time it would take to eat it, and the more time you have to eat it. So if you say that a kazayit is really big, and you say your time for eating that is really small, you're contradicting yourself. So you need to eat it like a normal person. 4 minutes is an awful long time to eat 1/3 or a half of a pizza matzah. Eat it nicely. Think about the leaving from Egypt and have kavanah. Okay, the first question I just got was the first question I just got was, what are the shiurim for the wine? Okay, so on Seder night, as opposed to Kiddush during the rest of the year, when only the person making Kiddush needs to have a Kiddush cup and a certain amount of wine, on Seder night, all of us at the Seder table need to have a cup of wine, and we all need to drink from that. The cup itself should minimally be, according to Rav Chaim Noah, the minimal mitzvot, the ones that I hold by, and that is 86 milliliters. The Chazon Ish holds that it's 156 milliliters. That's much bigger. But Moshe Feinstein has a measurement somewhere in the middle. Of that wine, a person should idealistically drink the whole cup. But if they can't drink the whole cup, they should drink most of the cup. And if they can't drink most of the cup, then they should at least drink most of a revi'it. That is the 86 milliliters. So if you have a wine cup, a big wine cup has got 200, some of them even more, 200 milliliters. That's huge. If you have a 200 milliliter wine cup and idealistically you're drinking the whole cup, you'll be a very happy person by the time we get to Hallel. You'll be great. You'll be singing Hallel with all your might or you'll be asleep. Many, many, many years ago, I was in Geula looking to buy beautiful wine cups for Seder night. And we had a baby at that time, so we had a baby's bottle with measurements on it. And so I surreptitiously took one of their cups and measured how much water fit in, and it was exactly 90 milliliters. So I hold that a cup should have 86 milliliters, 90 milliliters, great. So I went and bought like 15 of these cups for my Seder night. So everyone would have a cup that's exactly a revi'it, and they could easily drink the whole thing. I said to the salesman, I said, these cups are really great. They're the exact right measure. He was thrilled. As he wrapped my cups up, he yells out to his assistant, put them in the window, write a big sign, exactly the measured cups, put the price up. I did him a great thing. It was really good. I advise you to get smaller cups for Seder night, not little shot glasses. They're not big enough. Bigger cups that have the measure you hold by, 86 or 156. If you get like that, then people have a bigger chance of being able to drink the whole cup or at least half the cup or at least half of that 86 that you hold by. Next question. Let's look at the questions. Yes, I'll get the sheet that I've just made, and please God, we'll send that out for you. Maror measurements. The measurements for maror, you need a kazayit of maror. Now we eat maror twice. We eat maror with the bracha, al achilat maror, we don't lead to the left. We dip it in the charoset and shake that out. Then we're going to eat maror again in the Hillel sandwich. There are three customs with that maror. One custom is you've already dipped in one time maror in charoset. You don't need to dip again. And so they put maror dry on the matzah. The second custom says, no, here you should dip too. And they dip and they shake the charoset off like we did the first time. And the third custom, which is my custom, is that you lay the charoset on really thick in the Hillel sandwich. And that's really wonderful. Each of those customs has halachic backing. For maror, there are two major species that are used. When I was growing up, we used a root, a white root that's very, very sharp. In Hebrew, it's called chazeret, and in Yiddish, it's called chrein. I have no idea what it's called in English, but it's called maror, bitter herbs. I think the only reason they still grow it in the world is for Jews on Seder night. It's very, very pungent. In Israel, the better custom is to use, it's called horseradish in English, yes, but not the horseradish that you buy in the jar that's been pickled, that you eat with a gefilte fish. It's that substance, but by the time it's been pickled in the jar with other things, it's no longer kosher for Seder night. But if you buy the ingredient to that, the ingredient of the horseradish, the root of the horseradish, then you're good. But in Israel, most people use romaine lettuce. In Israel, they can grow that bug-free, and you can buy it where you just got to wash it off, and you don't have to worry about bugs. In Europe, they never had any green vegetables. I think they only had potatoes and horseradish and beetroot. So they didn't have that, and so that wasn't our Ashkenazi custom. But halachically, it's much better. It's also way easier to eat a kazayit of it, because a kazayit of lettuce leaf is about the size of a lettuce leaf that would sit pretty much on a piece of A4 paper, a piece of photographic paper. That there would be like one of the outer leaves, you're fine. The people who mix those two substances together, then you can either take a smaller leaf because you're putting in some of the maror. When we used to eat the horseradish, if you eat a full kazayit of that, you you probably keel over if you eat that straight away because it's very, very spicy. It would be better if just one person who was eating the amount said the bracha and everyone else amen, because maybe people won't eat enough. But eating the lettuce leaf, it's very easy. One big outer leaf is fine. Rav Rimon also has a nice picture of it in his book also. Do we have any? Oh, we've almost finished our time here. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so I'll just finish by saying that I saw advertised, and every year I see more and more advertisements for matzahs made by different things. Matzahs from oats, matzahs from spelt, matzahs from all the five grains. Um, People who have real health problems, people who are celiac and really need matzah without gluten, then they should use oat matzah if they can't use anything else. But everyone else who's healthy, you should know that the Ramah writes that the essence of doing the mitzvah, our custom is to use wheat flour, and that is the preferred substance to make our matzahs from. So that's one thing that a person should know, that if you have a choice and you can use what our regular matzahs are, what we buy regular matzahs, you should use the wheat matzahs. Only people who are a real medical need should fulfill the mitzvah on Seder night with something that's not a wheat matzah. Next, there are there are three types of matzahs that you can buy in the marketplace today. Spelt is a derivative of wheat. Nonetheless, the Ramah writes that our custom is to use wheat because it's higher up on the level and it's a higher, a more important grain, and also because all our production techniques of knowing 18 minutes and exactly how to make it have all been done for these last hundreds and 1,000 years using wheat matzahs. So we've got that technique down really well. When you start using another grain, it goes down on a level of importance, and also it starts getting tricky halachically about knowing exactly the best way to make it halachically. So you yotze with spelt, it's a derivative of wheat. You yotze if you use any of the five grains, wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt, any of the five grains. But halachically, it's better to use wheat if you can. I'll just finish off with one point before we take a break, and that is that on the market there are three different types of matzot. There's regular matzahs, there's shmura matzah, and then there's hand bake. All the hand bake is shmura. From the letter of the law, a person could use for Seder night for their mitzvah matzahs regular matzah. However, if a person can, they should use shmura matzah for the mitzvahs, for these beginning, middle, and end mitzvahs. For what you want to dip in your soup, that you can use anything. But for mitzvah matzah and for korech and for afikomen, you should try and use shmura matzah if you possibly can. There's a big machloket about what's better, hand or machine. Everyone should follow their custom. There are big rabbis who say machine is better, and there are big rabbis who say hand is better, and everyone should follow their family practice in that. If you don't have a family practice, you can pick and choose whatever you like. Ladies, it's been such a pleasure learning with you. We should continue to have only nisim and niflaot, the Kodesh Baruch Hu, like he took us out of Egypt with wonders and miracles, should continue to give divine assistance to the Jewish people and take us out to a complete redemption speedily in our days. It was a real pleasure learning Torah with you.
Thank you so much, Rav Sperling. If anyone has questions for Rav Sperling, you're welcome to, again, write them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll take a 10-minute break until we have our last shiur of the day. So see you all in 10 minutes.